I woke up to the sound of laughter. It was faint, high-pitched, and unmistakably a child's. But there were no children with us. We were 5 college students who had driven out to the state forest for the weekend, eager to disconnect from classes and city noise. The night before had started like any other camping trip. We built a fire, cooked cheap hot dogs, and traded jokes until the firewood turned to glowing embers. The forest was quiet except for crickets, and the stars were sharp and clear above us. We all went to bed around midnight, tired but content. That laughter cut through the silence around 3 in the morning. I sat up in my tent, my heart hammering. I thought maybe it was just a dream, but then I heard it again, closer this time. It echoed between the trees, bouncing unnaturally as if the forest itself was playing tricks on me. I unzipped the flap and poked my head out. Across the clearing I saw Logan step out of his tent. He looked just as confused as I felt. Behind him, Jessica whispered from inside her own tent. "Did you hear that too?" We all heard it. But when Logan shined his flashlight toward the sound, the beam caught nothing but empty trunks. No footsteps, no shapes, just silence after the laughter faded. By morning, we tried to brush it off. Maybe there were kids from another camp nearby. Maybe the sound carried strangely at night. We laughed about it at breakfast, though the unease lingered. That unease turned to panic when we noticed something wrong. 2 tents stood open and empty. Nathan and Claire were gone. Their sleeping bags were left behind, unzipped as if they had climbed out in the middle of the night. Their backpacks, shoes, and jackets were still there. There were no footprints leading away from the site. The ground was untouched. Jessica's voice trembled when she said, "This doesn't make sense. Where would they go without their stuff?" Logan tried to stay calm, but his hands shook as he gathered what little gear we had. "We'll find them. They couldn't have gone far." We spent the day searching. We called their names until our throats hurt, walked in widening circles, and even left markers to keep track of where we had been. The forest felt endless. No matter how far we walked, the trees pressed in, tall and silent. We didn't find so much as a broken twig to suggest Nathan or Claire had passed through. When evening came, we returned to camp, exhausted and unsettled. None of us wanted to admit it, but the forest felt wrong. Too still, too watchful. That night, it got worse. I was lying awake when I saw it. A figure moved between the trees, pale and thin, almost glowing in the dark. It didn't walk like a person. Its body seemed to flicker, like an image half-formed on a screen. "Do you see that?" I whispered to Jessica, who was in the tent beside mine. Her breath caught. "Oh my God, yes." The figure turned its head toward us, though it had no clear face. My skin crawled, every instinct screaming to stay hidden. Then it vanished, melting into the shadows as if it had never been there. The laughter came again, this time much closer. It circled our camp, darting from one side to the other, as if children we couldn't see were playing a game with us. Logan shouted into the trees, cursing and demanding answers, but the forest swallowed his voice. We huddled together until dawn, none of us daring to sleep. When the first light came, the woods looked ordinary again. Birds sang, sunlight cut through the canopy. But Nathan and Claire's tents were still empty, and now their names felt forbidden to speak. We were trapped. By the 3rd day, the silence between us was heavy. No one wanted to admit what we all knew, but the forest wasn't letting us go. The trail we had driven in on was gone. We tried to follow the compass, but every path looped back to the clearing where our camp sat like a wound in the woods. The shapes returned each night, sometimes one, sometimes more. Always at the edges, always just out of reach. Pale outlines of people, tall and small, watching us. We could not hear footsteps. We could not smell or touch them, only see. And every time they appeared, that laughter drifted closer. I started to wonder if Nathan and Claire were among them now. We stopped arguing about escape plans. We stopped talking about school or the city. All our energy went to staying alive, though we no longer knew what that meant. We built bigger fires. We kept watch in shifts. We avoided the trees at night. But the forest was patient. The last clear memory I have before everything changed was Logan leaning close to me and whispering, "If they come for me, don't follow." That night I saw one of the figures step into the light of our fire. It was shaped like a child, and it was smiling. The firelight flickered across the child-shaped figure. Its body was pale, almost transparent, but the smile was clear. It tilted its head, watching us as if curious. Jessica whimpered, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Logan stood up, clutching a heavy branch like a weapon. The figure did not move closer. It only laughed, the same sound that had woken us that first night. More voices joined in, overlapping, echoing from the trees. It felt like dozens of unseen children surrounded us. "Stay back," Logan shouted, swinging the branch. His voice cracked. The figure didn't flinch. It dissolved into the shadows, the smile lingering in my mind even after it was gone. That night, none of us slept. By morning, Logan was gone. His tent was unzipped, his backpack left behind. The branch he had carried was lying broken outside his tent as if it had been snapped in half. Jessica and I were the only ones left. We tried to leave again. The compass spun uselessly in my hand, the needle circling without direction. The trails twisted and doubled back until every path brought us to the same clearing. No matter how far we walked, the camp was waiting when we returned. By the fifth night, Jessica began to lose control. She cried constantly, begging me to stay awake with her. She said she could hear voices whispering her name when she closed her eyes. I told her it was in her head, but I knew it wasn't. The forest was speaking to her, the same way it had spoken to Nathan, Claire, and Logan. That evening I saw her standing at the edge of the trees, her body stiff, her face blank. "Jessica," I whispered, afraid to raise my voice. She didn't answer. Slowly she stepped into the woods, vanishing between the trunks. I chased after her, but when I reached the spot she had disappeared, there was nothing, just silence. I was alone. The next night, the shapes gathered openly around the camp. Dozens of them, tall and short, glowing faintly between the trees. They formed a circle, closing in. Their laughter rose until it filled the air, drowning out the crackle of the fire and the pounding of my heart. I screamed at them. I begged them to let me go. My voice sounded small in the endless forest. One of the taller figures stepped forward. For the first time I saw its face. It looked human, but empty, like a mask stretched too thin. Its mouth opened, and the sound that came out was not laughter. It was my own voice, repeating my words back to me. I stumbled backward, tripping over a rock, my flashlight slipping from my hand. When I grabbed it and pointed it forward, the figure was gone, but the others remained, their outlines swaying in the dark. I don't know how long I lasted after that. Time lost meaning. The forest kept me, just as it had kept the others. I ate little, drank from the stream nearby, but every night the circle of figures grew closer. On the final night I understood. The forest was not killing us, it was claiming us. When the laughter rose again, I felt it pulling at me, tugging at something deeper than my body. My vision blurred, my skin grew cold. I saw my own hands fading, becoming as pale and thin as the shapes that haunted me. I tried to fight it, but the harder I fought, the more the forest closed in. The last thing I remember was standing among them, looking back at the fire. I could see myself still sitting there, my body slumped and motionless, while the others waited for me to join. Now I walk between the trees at night. I hear the campers when they come, laughing nervously by their fires, thinking they are safe. I wait at the edge of the light with the others. We never leave. We never let anyone leave. The forest keeps us all. I went out to hunt in the early morning, carrying only what I needed: my rifle, a small pack, and a map I had trusted for years. The woods were familiar, but that day something felt different. I noticed a narrow trail breaking off from the main path. It wasn't marked on my map. The dirt looked untouched, as if no one had walked there in decades. Curiosity pushed me forward. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. Birds stopped calling. The air grew heavier. After an hour of following that forgotten trail, I found a clearing. At the center stood a small wooden cabin, gray with age, roof sagging, windows clouded with grime. I should have walked past it, but something about it held me there. I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust. Furniture stood in place as if waiting for someone to return. A table with 2 chairs, a broken lantern, shelves lined with jars that had long since dried out. But in the fireplace, fire still burned. Not wild flames, just glowing embers, as if someone had tended them minutes before I arrived. No footprints in the dust, no food, no tools, just that fire. I backed out and set up camp a few yards from the cabin. I told myself I would leave in the morning. The forest at night is always full of sounds, but that night the noises felt different. Too sharp, too close. I heard footsteps circling the camp, light, almost playful. They stopped when I grabbed my rifle. I called out, but no one answered. At dawn, I found tracks in the soft soil around my tent. Small, barefoot, children's footprints. They led off into the trees, deep into the brush where no child should have been. I wanted to get out. I packed fast, stuffed everything into my bag, and tried to return the way I came. But after hours of walking, the trail bent and twisted until the trees opened again on the same clearing. The same cabin, the same smoke curling weakly from the chimney. I forced myself to stay calm. I checked my compass. It spun in slow circles, never settling. I thought maybe I had gotten turned around, so I marked the trees as I walked. Hours later, the marks reappeared in front of me. The cabin always returned. That night, I did not sleep. I stayed awake with the fire crackling low. Again, footsteps pressed into the silence, soft, careful. They paused near the tent, then moved on. I kept my eyes fixed on the glow of the fire until dawn. The next morning, the tracks were there again. Dozens this time. Small feet pressed into the dirt in circles around the camp. Some led to the cabin door, none came out. I told myself to push through the trees, no matter where the trail led. I hacked at the undergrowth with my knife, refusing to stay on the path. But after what felt like half the day, the woods opened again. The cabin stood waiting for me. Inside, the embers glowed brighter than before. I tried the windows, thinking I might smash one and see if anything stirred. The glass felt warm to the touch, as if heat came from within the walls themselves. Dust covered everything, yet the fire burned cleaner, stronger. On the mantel above it, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small wooden toy. A horse with one wheel missing. It was not there yesterday. I dropped it, heart pounding, and stepped back out into the clearing. My chest felt tight. I couldn't breathe properly. That night, I didn't dare camp. I sat against a tree with my rifle ready, staring at the cabin in the clearing. At first, silence pressed heavy. Then the footsteps returned, closer this time. I heard giggles, high-pitched, childlike. I raised the rifle, hands trembling, and shouted into the dark. The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse. When morning came, I was shaking from exhaustion. I turned to leave once more, but no matter which way I walked, the trees bent back, and the cabin came into view. This place wanted me here. I felt eyes on me, though I saw nothing. That night, I decided to test it. I left my pack outside my tent, right where the footprints had been. I sat awake, staring into the dark. Hours passed, then I heard movement. Slow steps. The sound of fabric dragging across the dirt. When I checked at dawn, my pack was gone. In its place sat another toy, a small carved figure, a child smiling, arms outstretched. And the fire inside the cabin was no longer just embers. It blazed. I didn't touch the toy. I left it in the dirt where it waited for me, smiling with that frozen carved grin. My hands shook as I backed away, but no matter how far I moved, the cabin pulled me back into its orbit. By midday, I sat again in front of the same warped door, watching the smoke coil into the sky. I thought about burning it down. Maybe if the cabin was gone, the trail would release me. I gathered wood, built a pile against the walls, and struck a match. The flames climbed, crackling and snapping. For a moment I felt relief, but then the smoke shifted. Instead of gray, it turned thick and black, the air filled with the smell of charred hair, not wood. My stomach turned. I stumbled back. The fire died in seconds, leaving the cabin untouched. Not a single scorch mark remained. Night fell fast that day, as if the sun had been dragged down. I lit my lantern, clutching it like a shield. The footsteps returned, circling tighter. This time I didn't just hear them. I saw shadows between the trees. Small figures darting, their movements too quick. Their laughter bubbled up, sharp and wrong. I aimed my rifle at one shadow, but my finger froze on the trigger. The figure stepped forward. It was small, pale, and barefoot, with hair hanging over its face. A child, or at least something shaped like one. It tilted its head at me, then vanished into the dark. I didn't sleep. When morning came, I found more toys scattered around the camp. A wooden doll missing its eyes, a rattle that clicked, though nothing was inside. Each one carved, old, worn smooth from use. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed into the cabin. Inside, the fire blazed like a furnace. The heat pressed against my skin, but the rest of the room stayed frozen in time, dust hanging heavy in the air. On the table lay my pack, open, with my gear neatly placed beside it, but my rifle was gone. Then I heard it, soft humming, a lullaby sung in a child's voice. It came from the corner where the shadows were deepest. I lifted the lantern. The dust moved as if stirred by invisible hands. And in that dust, small footprints appeared, walking toward me. I ran. I didn't care where. I'd clawed through brush, ignored the trail, fought until my arms bled from branches tearing at me. Yet the trees opened again on the clearing. The cabin stood waiting, chimney smoking, door ajar. I collapsed. The forest had no end. That night, I refused to look at the toys. I sat with my back to the fire outside, rifeless, lantern dimming. The laughter returned, but now there were whispers, words I couldn't catch. They circled me, closer, closer, until it felt like dozens of small mouths breathed against my skin. I screamed for them to stop. The woods went silent. At dawn, I woke with dirt in my mouth. My camp was gone. My tent, lantern, food, all gone. Only the toys remained, placed in a perfect circle around where I had slept. And in the center, right on my chest, sat the wooden doll. Its carved face was no longer blank. It had my face. I hurled it into the trees, but the sound of it hitting the ground never came. I stumbled back to the cabin, shaking, desperate, broken. Inside, the fire roared higher than ever, licking the chimney, filling the room with heat. The shelves that once held only dust now brimmed with toys, lined up as if displayed in a shop. Dozens of dolls, animals, rattles, each carved with detail too sharp to be handmade. And in the fire I saw them, faces, children's faces, mouths open in silent cries. Their eyes locked on me through the flames. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut. The humming returned, louder, joined by voices in unison. A nursery rhyme, sung in a language I couldn't recognize. The toys began to move. Heads turned, tiny limbs shifted. The wooden doll with my face sat on the mantel above the fire now, smiling wider than before. The last thing I remember before darkness hit me was the sound of many small feet rushing across the floor, and the fire swallowing every sound of my scream. When I woke, I was outside again. The cabin stood quiet, smoke rising faintly from its chimney. My map lay in the dirt, but the trail I had followed was gone. No path led out, only the cabin, always the cabin. And on the ground beside me, carved into the dirt with small hands, was a single word: stay. I never thought I would drive back to these woods. The road into Pine Hollow stretched dark and empty, lined with tall pines that blocked most of the sky. I kept the urn in the passenger seat, strapped in with a seat belt like it was alive. My brother, Thomas, had wanted his ashes scattered here, where we used to hike as kids. I promised I would do it, but the thought of standing alone in these trees, with only his remains, made my stomach twist. By the time I parked at the trailhead, the sun was fading. The forest looked like a wall of black shapes, unmoving and endless. I stepped out, cradling the urn against my chest. The air was damp and smelled of moss. Every sound felt sharper, the crunch of gravel, the wind brushing the branches, my own breathing. I walked deeper into the woods, following the trail we had taken so many summers ago. The silence grew heavier with each step. No birds, no insects, just the faint rustle of leaves. When I reached a small clearing, I stopped. The spot looked almost identical to how I remembered it, except older, lonelier. This would be the place. I unscrewed the lid of the urn, my hands trembling. Ashes shifted inside with a faint hiss, almost like a whisper. I told myself it was nothing, only the wind, only nerves. I held the urn high and tilted it forward, letting the gray dust scatter into the breeze. It swirled, caught in the fading light, before drifting into the undergrowth. Then I heard it, a sound, faint, carried by the trees. Evan. My blood ran cold. It was my name. I froze, the urn still in my hand. My eyes darted around the clearing. No one was there. The trail behind me was empty. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was the wind, just the wind. But then it came again, softer this time, curling right against my ear. Evan. I spun around, clutching the urn as if it could protect me. The clearing remained silent, unmoved. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to close the urn and put it down on a rock. I needed to leave, now. As I turned back toward the trail, the voice changed. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It carried weight, sorrow, something almost human. Don't go. Stay. The voice was my brother's. I stumbled back, my throat tight. I hadn't heard Thomas's voice in 2 years. Not since the accident. But here it was, threading through the trees, unmistakable. I shouted into the woods, my voice shaking. This isn't real. You're gone. The forest gave no answer. But as I hurried down the trail, I felt the echo of his voice following me, pressing against my back like invisible hands. By the time I reached my car, sweat dripped down my neck despite the chill. I threw the urn onto the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove away without looking into the rearview mirror. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I heard him whispering my name again. Not in my dreams, not in my memory, but right there in the room. The second night was worse. I woke to the sound of my name, louder now, vibrating against the walls. My lamp flickered. The air grew heavy, damp like the forest had followed me home. By the third night, I wasn't sure if I was awake or trapped in some half-dream. The voice was everywhere, rising from the corners of my apartment. My brother's tone had shifted from pleading to something raw, broken, desperate. Stay with me, please. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't help. The sound crawled inside my head. I kept asking myself if I had done something wrong. Maybe scattering the ashes had not been enough. Maybe he hadn't wanted to leave. Or maybe the forest had held on to him, and by bringing the urn there, I had opened the door wider. The following evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag, grabbed the urn again, and drove back into Pine Hollow. The voice wasn't whispering now, it was calling, loud, clear, and I was going to answer. The forest swallowed me the moment I stepped off the road. Shadows shifted around the trees, darker than the night itself. My hands gripped the urn tightly. The voice was already there, not ahead, not behind, but inside me, threading through my thoughts. Evan. Come. I followed it deeper, my footsteps hesitant but compelled. Every snap of a branch underfoot sounded like a warning. I passed the old creek, the place where Thomas and I used to skip stones. The water gleamed under the faint moonlight, but I barely noticed. The voice had grown louder, more urgent, almost pleading. Don't leave me. Stay. I stopped in a clearing I didn't recognize. The trees pressed close, forming a circle. Moonlight barely touched the ground. The voice wasn't coming from anywhere specific. It was everywhere. It was him. Thomas, I whispered, though my voice cracked. Yes, it's me. The sound carried a pain I couldn't ignore. My chest tightened. It wasn't just a voice. It was a presence, something desperate, something real. I dropped the urn onto the damp soil. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs refused. The air thickened around me, cold and heavy. I could hear leaves rustling, though the wind was still, and then a figure emerged between the trees, faint, flickering, barely more than a shadow. But I knew it was him. I can't leave, the voice said. Not without you. I staggered back. Fear and grief collided in my chest. My mind screamed that this was impossible, that he was dead, that I was losing it. But my eyes didn't lie. The figure was there, and it was waiting. The voice grew louder, turning into a scream that tore through the night. Evan, stay with me, please. I stumbled, falling to my knees. My thoughts scattered. The world felt unreal, warped, as though the forest itself was alive and breathing, pulling me in. My mind fractured with every cry. I could almost feel the soil under me shifting, roots twisting around my legs, pulling me closer. Thomas, I can't. I gasped, tears streaming down my face. You can, you must, you promised. The ground beneath me seemed to quake. Shadows stretched and reached. The trees leaned inward. I felt the pull, magnetic, irresistible, as if the forest and the voice were one, demanding I join him. I screamed, trying to resist, but the world bent. My body moved forward, drawn toward the dark heart of the woods. The urn slid from my hands and shattered on the ground, ashes scattering into the wind. I didn't care. I couldn't care. And then it was over. Silence. I opened my eyes. The moon hung high. The forest was empty. No trees, no shadows, no figure, only the faint whisper of the wind. I was alone, or maybe I wasn't. The emptiness pressed against me, heavy and endless, and I realized the voice had never left. It waits. Every night I hear it again. Soft at first, then rising, calling me back to the clearing, to the hollow where Thomas still lingers. And part of me wants to go. Part of me wants to vanish into the forest with him, to leave the world behind, to answer the pull. But I stay. I stay because I have to. Because if I leave, if I give in, the hollow voice will take me completely. And then I will be gone too. The forest waits. The voice waits. And every night it calls my name. Evan, come back. I close my eyes, but I never sleep, because I know eventually I will answer.